idea is that it's not us who are asking questions, but you. And Camilla is open to answer what she wants to answer. And if she feels that it's not okay, she can also skip. We are recording this meeting, but if you want to have any question off record, we can pause, and so that feel free to tell us what you are most comfortable with. And yeah, thank you for joining. And I leave it now to Rachel and Camilla to tell us a little bit about what you are doing, what you've been doing, and why you are in our small world of education emergencies. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ola. And it's great to see all of you here. I know we're a small group, but that's quite nice, actually. It can be more of an informal conversation. So we're absolutely delighted to have Camilla Lodi joining us for an AMA, Ask Me Anything. So Camilla, maybe we'll just start with a brief introduction in your own words. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work in education and education emergencies. From starting at any point you like.
Thank you. And I was actually talking to Ola and Rachel just before we came in, saying how I wish we were all sitting in the same room, and how after these couple of years of pandemic, how how these webinars have become quite intense and heavy in terms of structured presentations and very kind of formal. So I like the idea of really pretending that we are all in this, maybe in Switzerland or in Amman or in Juba, all sitting together and really, exchanging. So basically, this is a little bit of myself, but it's a little bit of us together. So I've been working in education in emergency since 2007 in Burundi, in Africa. That's where it all started. Actually, no, with NRC in Burundi, but in 2001 in Somalia. So that's where it started. I'm now heading I'm head of the psychosocial support, NRC, Norwegian Refugee Council, psychosocial support unit, where we have this program called Better Learning Program. And it's just about 1 year since I've in this new, let's say, global role. And I'm sitting here in Amman, hosted in the regional Middle East office of NRC.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Camilla. And I think it would be really interesting to understand a bit more about your work on the Better Learning Programmes. I know this has been a huge focus of your work, and it's coming to an exciting point. Lots and lots of progress has been made with that. So maybe you could give us a little overview of what BLP is and where it's going as well.
Exactly, I can do that, and I'm aware that around maybe in this room there are different backgrounds and experiences, and therefore I won't go too much into the technicalities, but try to keep it simple, and then it's a question and answer type format, so you can ask me. But everyone has their own professional baby, and Better Learning Program is for sure the one that I've been more engaged and passionate about it, because I saw it growing from being a country office program. When I arrived in Palestine in 2014, after one of the last crises and wars, to become a regional program in the Middle East, where it kind of grew into governments and Ministry of Education to the point that it has been, in some countries, government have requested to mainstream this program across the national primary school formal system. And now, especially after the whole, or during the COVID pandemic, because of the requests and the needs to support psychosocial support, then it has kind of expanded. So just to give you an idea in terms of numbers, in these years of COVID-19, the number of countries grew by 40%. And right now we are implementing this program in 26 countries across the globe. Okay, I didn't tell what it is. I just said it is a program.
Oh.
Okay, so in a snapshot, what the Better Learning Program is, and I want to keep it very visual and very, so if you think about traffic lights, about the green, the yellow and the red, so we have a level 1, which is the green one, which basically is for a training for teachers that are dealing with children in displacement that are living in acute crisis or protracted conflict. And so in the Better Learning Program 1, we provide techniques on how to enhance focus and concentration in classes where there are children that have this background. Then we zoom into a smaller category of children that have dropped in their learning outcomes. So they were really good in Arabic, in maths, in English, and suddenly, because of, again, acute crisis or trauma, they have gone down in their learning outcomes. And therefore, this Better Learning Program 2, we work with teachers on supporting techniques and approaches to support executive functioning, working on routine, working on helping homework, structured approaches to support that recovery. And then we zoom into the last one, which is the red one, which is the more specialized psychosocial support intervention, which is for either counselors or psychologists working with children who have trauma-induced nightmares. And this is one of the symptoms usually of post-traumatic stress disorder. And basically, we provide capacity building to those counselors to work with children. And yeah, and basically that is it in terms of the snapshot of 1, 2, 3.
Great, thank you, Camilla. I really like the traffic light analogy as a way of thinking about it. So anyone is welcome to, of course, unmute yourself, raise your hand, ask Camilla any questions. Ola has a question. Ola, Fadali.
Yeah, thank you. I just wonder about these are resources for the children directly. It's not for the educators, right? So these are material to be used by the children, or do you have guides also for the educators?
So at NRC, what we usually do is that we do direct implementation or indirect implementation through partners. So if it is direct implementation, we usually have education team members that are trained and are basically providing capacity building to either a group of master trainers or teachers or counselors. And then those teachers, those counselors in the language of the country where we operate, are they themselves providing the service directly to children. Otherwise, in hard to reach areas or in countries where NRC does not have access directly, we then train partners, local partners, that are then conducting and carrying out a similar type of intervention with teachers. And I see in the group there is a colleague of mine who knows very well. So the question could be not only for me, but also for him, on what capacity building needs means.
Oh no, Camilla, today I'm here as a normal INEE user, so I don't want to interfere, and it's your, no. Go ahead, please.
You are all welcome.
I see Grazia has a question.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you, Camilla. And other colleagues, of course, around the world. I have a question, because in South Sudan now we have the new policy for the disability inclusion. But of course, you can imagine the situation in all the countries, and not just in Juba, but out of Juba, of course. And then we are thinking about to provide the teacher, not just with the training, because of course they need specific training, but also the material in order to support them. And then I would like to know if in some countries where we already work as NRC, we develop this kind of low cost, available locally material. So because we know that we have a lot of ICT gadgets around the world, but are very expensive for us. So my question is, maybe we can put in place something that in other countries already we are putting in place. Thank you.
Yeah, so lately, last year actually, we finalized a guidance kit, which was meant specifically, first of all, internally for NRC staff, and then maybe later, after we have piloted, it could also be shared to the wider partners community. But basically, in the guidance note, we have 5, let's say, booklets on okay, first of all, how to use this guidance, programming for well-being, preparing for BOP, capacity building, monitoring and evaluation. And there are some practical tools that are inserted in this kit. Now, during COVID-19, we also developed very basic reading materials, leaflets, WhatsApp messaging on PSS, psychosocial support, tips. So there is quite a lot, and that I can share with Rachel, but also internally with NRC and you. And I'm also aware that there will be more this year, because let's say so far the experience is mostly in the Middle East region. And so most of what has been developed is based on these years experience and kind of really thorough research that has been carried out. But a lot is expanding now in a lot of countries in Africa, and we expect new materials and new contextualized tools.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Camilla. And it's great that colleagues can connect on this call about internal resources. Fabulous. So I wonder, just to zoom out a little bit, because I know we went straight in with the BLP and psychosocial support, but maybe just to kind of zoom out again and pose this question to you. What got you into this field of work in the first place? Is it something you always felt drawn towards, or was there a moment in your life where you said, okay, this is what I want to be doing with my time, this is really important to me?
Okay, so to tell you the truth, I had really no idea about this this world when I first visited Nairobi. A couple of friends who were living there, working for the UN, or I don't remember, for NGOs, and the idea was to go and take. Had just finished my master's in Italy and wanted to take a break, and I was brought into a very kind of emergency type of a request from an Italian country director of a small Italian NGO that asked me if I could write an education proposal for an eco project in Bay and Bakol region in Somalia. I had no idea what she was talking about. She was desperate because she didn't have anyone with education background, and then I just kind of started that way. Did this first, flew to Bay and Bakol regions, stayed there a couple of weeks instead of 2 months because there was a shooting and I was evacuated back in Nairobi. Once I basically went back to Italy, the proposal was approved miraculously, and then at that point I was called for a contract of 1 year in Somalia. And that's when I would say, that's when I was more aware and more, let's say, aware of aware of a big new choice in life to do. And that's where I think it all started, taking the choice and the responsibility of saying, okay, I'll try for 1 year, and that's how I dived into Somalia.
Wow, that's fascinating, Camilla. I think there's no conventional way into this kind of work. I think, especially in education emergencies, there's lots of different routes in. Some, many of us on this call are former teachers and then moved in that way. And it's just really interesting to hear. And I imagine maybe for Rosa, who's doing her master's at the moment, kind of thinking like, how's this field evolved, and how did people used to get into these kind of jobs versus now what does the field look like? So I think that's really, really fascinating to hear. I've got more questions for you, but I'm just gonna quiet myself and see if anybody else wants to raise a hand or type in the chat.
Feel free to ask any question. It might be something fun. Ask Camilla what she likes to eat, Middle Eastern food, or she prefers maybe Italian food.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, don't hesitate to ask anything.
Answer that question now.
Yeah, why not?
So
yeah, I know both myself, and yeah, I know that Italians are very chauvinistic. So I would like to hear Camilla about this.
So look, I see 3 Italians in the call already, but I don't know how many from the Middle East are there. But look, the food here is fantastic. I wouldn't know how to cook it. So this is the problem. So if I have to cook it, I would go back to cooking Italian. But the food in the Middle East, and it's maybe Jordan is, out of all countries, it's not the best. I would, would go to Beirut, but yeah, the food is amazing. So I think I would keep both at the same level.
This is the diplomatic answer that I was expecting.
It's not diplomatic. I really love it.
Great.
Okay, Christian has a question for you. Go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, so maybe we can keep it on the Italian, let's say, conversation. And I would like to ask Camilla to describe one of the most, let's say, impactful situations she has seen since she's working on the Better Learning Program, or maybe if not impactful, but emotionally strong. I don't know, something.
So maybe that there are two. So there are two stories. One is a more personal story, and one is a more professional story. Let's start by the easy one. The professional one is the fact that a group of us that have experienced this and have been out in the field and seeing how this impacts children, teachers, and parents have believed in this project, and how a group of us, which is, it depends, it can be small, but it can be from the wider community, has really managed to scale up to such a level that I didn't imagine when I first started in Palestine. When I started in Palestine, and my first conversation with the country director of NRC at that moment was, I'm sorry, we need to close down the education program. You're here for a couple of months. There's no funding. Please find a way of, handing over and transitioning out in such a way that it's not impactful. And that's when I found myself saying, okay, we need to change the cards. We need to find a way of, and that was the start of the scaling up of BOP, at least in Palestine. And then in these years, just how big it became. And then there are so many stories of children that I've met along the way, and one of them, which I'll just call him Mohammed for just to give him a name, who I remember was drawing these birds full of blood. So they did, all the children were drawing butterflies and lovely sunshine, and this kid was drawing birds with full of blood, and discovered the story about this child, and just saw the transformation, and how he was part of some of the sessions of the Better Learning Program Free, and the impact it has had on him, and really what a change, and what a, how incredible is it even to just witness that type of well-being. So there are a lot of more stories, but that if I have to think about that child, that's a story that I remember.
Thank you, Camilla. We see two hands raised. Can we go to Rosa first and then to you, Ola? Thanks. Great.
Thanks. I kind of have two questions. One's more professional and one's more personal. So I'll start with the professional one, actually. So, I know that like education in emergency situations is a somewhat new field. But how, like, since you've kind of watched it develop and change in directions and everything else, I guess my question to you would be like, where do you think it's going? And where do you think it's sort of lacking? Like, where do you think it needs the most support or development, kind of, that just based on what you've seen? And then, yeah.
So there is a very simple example. So when I started some time ago, for example, just to give you a sense that when we were talking about the minimum standard in INEE and how those need to be contextualized and piloted in each and every country. But if you look at the regional INEE minimum standard package, psychosocial support was really maybe not even mentioned 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And then the education kind of, the community of experts kind of got together and developed the psychosocial support guidance note. And for the first time, we were defining what does it mean, psychosocial support? What does social emotional learning mean? How are those connected? How can we do education in emergency with children who are not feeling well? And how do children learn if they're not feeling well? So those kind of obvious questions started to generate an understanding that psychosocial support is a mandatory type of step in order to allow children to feel safe, because it's about these children are moving, are coming away from conflict, arriving in, maybe being discriminated in the country where they arrive. So the basis of working on well-being, it's like a fundamental start point upon which then we can discuss about academic functioning, executive functioning, and learning outcomes. So I think for me, that's been quite a long journey. Where I see it going, I think that I was a couple of 5 days ago, we were on the, Christian and I and colleagues were on the border with Ukraine and discussing with teachers in Poland. And first time we're discussing about better learning program in Europe. And we realized that psychosocial support was not at all a component, part of their curricula in Polish school. So this is kind of, whenever you think you have reached somewhere, there is still so much in terms of advocacy to be raised, and in terms of making sure that this is integrated inside curricula.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and I agree. I was a teacher before I kind of switched gears, and it's not very present in American curriculum either, unfortunately. Although it's slowly, depending on the state, it's moving and developing. And then the personal question, if you don't mind. So I know, just generally being in kind of the ed and emergency situation field, you kind of expect, I would imagine, to kind of relocate pretty frequently. And so I guess I'm just curious what you found kind of the most challenging about that, and also the most rewarding on the positive side of things, of kind of having to be more migratory in your living.
I think it gives you, so if you look at it from one side of the coin, you have the possibility of living different lives. So you're given each and every time a new opportunity to learn, understand, integrate into a new culture, understand the new values, learn how, learn about education systems, but also learn in a personal level how things are different, and things are always different from what you think they are. So that's the extraordinary opportunity that comes with this type of work. And I think it can become a sort of an addiction, because you are always wanting to learn more, and each and every new opportunity, new country opens up an incredible variety of knowledge. On the other hand, I guess you need to also balance where that takes you in terms of your personal life, family that you leave in your country, friends that you've grown up with that you also see once in a year, and how you manage to make sure that your close friends or families are still going to be part of your life. So, inviting them over. I've been lucky because my sisters were able to visit me nearly in every duty station, also in Somalia, which I'm very proud of. So I guess to tell you the truth, it depends at what level. In some periods, I also went through quite some psychotherapy because it in some situation, it really challenges a lot of your certainties. But I think, yeah, it's a balance between priorities in life, right? And what you think you're called to do, and where you can make a difference. So I don't know, it's a very personal answer, and I guess everyone has their own.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. It was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Camilla, for being so candid. Yeah, the priorities thing is quite key, I think, and you can't. Yeah, it's just interesting to reflect on when you deliberately uproot yourself to go and do work somewhere else, what that kind of costs you in terms of relationships. Heather, you have your hand raised.
Yes. Thank you so much for this. I was actually early thinking I was late, so I could formulate a very long question in my waiting time. So I'm just going to read what I wrote. I work, sorry it's dark. I work in a, turn on the light, there we go. I work in within an indigenous village in Latin America in Panama. And some very, very precious children. We worked there for 9 years. I'm a former sign language interpreter in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm getting my master's in education with technology integration, just for this reason, just for my students. My husband's Panamanian. We've lived there for 9 years. And Panama, actually, I did some research. It's 211 days of full school closure, which is the biggest break from classroom actual teaching and learning in the world. Any nation in the world is Panama, go figure. It's a very small country. So I work with deaf students. I work with other disabled students, even more bleak, obviously, with disabled students, and that's my heart. But I love all of them. This is my village. I know their dogs' names. You know, I knew all the babies before, but I suspect that there's a lot more babies when we return next month. So I guess my question would be, like, in such a grassroots environment. Like I just showed up there kind of like you, and there was one student who stole my heart, and I realized what he was capable of. He was a 3-year-old deaf Indigenous boy, and he took to technology like nothing I've ever seen. It was just amazing. So I've actually started teaching coding and STEM to them because they're so conceptual, which has been amazing. And so I'm anticipating as well a lot of new moms when we get back because of just the crisis and the traumatic, just being away from school for so long. So my little girls who were so excited to learn, and all they wanted to do was do math pages. They're like, I know I can color, but don't you have any math for me to do? Like 8-year-old Indigenous kids. And they're actually very good at coding. I brought some iPads down and they were, anyway. And then the babies as well. I love working with the babies and giving them a little bit of a heads up with just bringing iPads, and they can do, at 2, they're doing, I think that's would give them a heads up when they do enter school. So I'll be returning next month. Sorry. Okay. So yeah, like just as a grassroots person, I don't know the language. I'm trying to make the biggest difference I can for, my students, for the village, and then it's a small country. So possibly we could make a big impact on the country. What would you do if you showed up in a village like that, which I guess you did actually?
Wow. So yes, that's a difficult question. I guess I would go back to, let's say, the structure that we usually follow and use, but I think that at the beginning it's a lot about listening to what the needs are, right? And what we call doing an assessment and finding out at different levels from the community, parents, teachers, and children, what is it that would be useful in terms of educational support. And the language being a barrier, right? Because so finding somebody that I don't know if there is a possibility of hiring like a translator and finding out how really to kind of kick off that type of communication and understanding the needs, and based on the needs, then I guess tailor something that is appropriate to the context. It's a very generic question because it depends really on the type of needs that are there. And I'm sure that in the call here in the group, there might be, suggestions and ideas on how to make an impactful. I remember the time I was in Somalia. At a certain point, I think it was night, evening, and I heard somebody knocking at the door. Got out. It was a big truck full of boxes with a lot of different toys, materials for children, a lot of clothes, Bibles, and they were asking whether NRC could dispatch all these donation materials inside schools. And of course, being in a Muslim country and having collaborating with the Ministry of Education, it was not what was the best approach. So we said no, and I guess we're always confronted with what the model that we think fits that place and what actually people need and want based on their history, on their experience, and on their needs, on their systems. So that's kind of just to give like a crazy night in Berbera, having to realize and quickly make a choice of saying, no, we cannot do that.
Thank you very much. That helps a lot. Yeah. Yes, of course. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Camilla. Ola, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Heather, for your question, because it touches a little bit on what I had on my mind. I wanted to ask Camilla, how did you start, let's say, with BLP, because this is your baby, as you were saying. How did you start and making sure that you are working for the context and not importing, let's say, PSS interventions or ideas or approaches from elsewhere? How did you make sure that you are really creating something for these children and not children from Western countries, let's say?
Yeah, and I think this is so. This is where it makes a difference to believe in a program, in a let's say in an intervention when it has impact. So for me, I was actually very skeptical. I was very skeptical from the very beginning about non-specialized personnel working in an area of post-traumatic stress disorder, like in Gaza after the bombing, having teachers that don't have a psychology background. I was very skeptical about, with the professor who kind of helped us design at the very beginning this concept and this program. And I arrived with my own type of judgment and with my own educational background, basically. And then let's say my change came about when starting to listening to the teachers, talking to the parents, of course, not in Arabic. Unfortunately, I don't speak Arabic, but we had good education staff who spoke both English and Arabic, and listening to the people who were really implementing and wanting to make changes. So this is why it's like a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down. And this is what, at least for me, what makes a difference, because it's really, I am just moving along and tagging on a flag of people that are asking for what they are experimenting in their own schools, in their own homes, in their own governmental systems, and in their own ministries. So that's, I think, what made, at least for me, change my mind. It's when I heard them explaining and providing examples.
Can you think about examples of, let's say, assets, as Rachel has written in the chat, assets of the local educators that you were not expecting? Or ideas or practices, whatever.
So I think that what has worked well is the simplicity of this program, which is really based on universal principles. So these are the hopeful research-based principles that are kind of for children, youth, and adults. for any person who is in a recovery, living in crisis. So because of the simplicity and because of the structure that it had, I think that it was quite, and it is quite easy for operators on the ground to contextualize it and to adapt it according to the way they do education. So it's I think it's been used, but there is, although we have a universal global manuals, there are always differences in the wording. In some countries, we cannot use the word war. In some others, we use conflict. In some others, we call it stress. In some, so the songs, Polish song, Ukrainian song, in the exercises, in some countries, we cannot do certain movements. So it's really, I guess it's similar to the story of the INEE minimum standard contextualization. So we can never, universally say that there are minimum standards that work for all.
Last question, and then I'll stop here. So it's a tricky one. In the design of your program, did you allow for, let's say, using the religion as part of psychosocial support, or open the door for the educators to make use of their customs, traditions, and religion to support the children and support themselves? Or did you leave it open? Or work against it? Yeah, I'm always questioning myself where to put religion in the psychosocial support in countries where religion is really present.
So we carried out focus group discussions in Jordan, Syria, and if I remember well, also Cameroon, with youth, asking them what does well-being mean according to you, and based on these hundreds of youth. And based on also the existing frameworks, existing literature, desk review, and all of that, spiritual values was one very key important aspect of well-being. That said, again, the global manuals are neutral. So they don't have any type of religious influence, but there is a certain, let's say, there is a certain gray area where spiritual values are part of the program. So, for example, to give you an example of, we were asked in Afghanistan to basically put the Quran as an as a initial song before the start of the classes. And so in those cases, we need to be careful and say, no, the BOP is neutral and does not, we need to be open to all children, minorities and beliefs. So basically, although spiritual value is a component that intrinsic to well-being, the manuals remain and the program remains neutral in terms of that direction.
Very much.
Thank you so much, Camilla, and thanks for these these fantastic questions. I think that one around well-being bears asking over and over and over again when you're engaging in PSS and SEL activities. And we're doing at INEE a lot of work at the moment around teacher well-being and contextualizing a teacher well-being guidance note. Well, the first question is, what are we talking about when we talk about well-being, and how does that term translate into different languages? And even if it does translate, is that still the meaning that's kind of taken? And there's some really interesting, so we're engaging with 4 different groups to contextualize, and in Myanmar, the group there of action researchers are, you know, offering up a different an alternative to this word well-being, which was something like physical, social and emotional stability or something like this. And I think that's, yeah, I just think it's so key, and it goes to all the questions kind of have linked really, really nicely around, you know, Heather, you're asking around how do you support when you see that there's a need. I think, you know, the very first place starts with listening. What's already going on there? What like, how can you understand a situation if you're an outsider, and what part should you be playing in an intervention, if any, if at all? And I think, you know, when it comes to such fundamental states like well-being and positive well-being, that's incredibly important, because there's so much more room there to cause harm if we're not approaching it from a listening perspective, from the perspective of, I actually don't know, I need to understand better. So yeah, really some really great questions and a lot of food for thought. We've got 4 minutes remaining. Does anybody have any burning questions that they'd love to ask Camilla in these final few minutes?
I guess I'm curious how you sometimes convince, for example, like governments that psychosocial support is needed, especially if it's not necessarily something that's recognized in cultural values or kind of attitudes. Like, if it's not present, for example, in the regular culture, how do you advocate for it in these emergency situations in a way that it's actually received?
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations tend to have, I guess, similar approaches, but it's about piloting, usually starting in a number of small number of schools, and then doing research, evaluation, showing the impact, showing the results. So we usually start by the why, not the how, but the why it is important, and the why is really comes through research. And then you have different levels of research, right? You have like the randomized controlled trial or longitudinal research, where you manage to kind of measure children, a group of children that have gone through an intervention, and children who haven't, what's the difference? And then 6 months later, same children. And this is so difficult to do in such crisis and volatile context, because those same children, you know, you have to find them, you have to so you have those type of research, but you also have a simpler type of research, which can be qualitative. You can have focus group discussions, you can discuss, and you can present basically results, keeping in mind that governments and ministries, I'm sure, you know, that results make a difference, but also, of course, they are drawn by political direction and sometimes, you know, funding, and sometimes crisis is about, you know, putting priorities. What are the priorities that are requested. So there are a lot of levels of complexity, but usually we would start by the why.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question, Rosa, and something that like we'd all like to learn from these examples, especially I think the BLP example and the trying to integrate that is just such a fascinating case study, because it's a long-term process to influence policy, but something that we know makes the biggest difference if it's coming at the state level. Okay, so we're at the hour. And it's been a wonderful hour and it's flown by, and I feel like we all know Camilla a little bit better, and it's been an absolute pleasure to sit with you all. And I do feel like we were in, you know, around a coffee table or something rather than on a webinar. So enormous thanks to Ola for setting these up, for hosting the AMAs. Huge thanks to Camilla for giving us your precious time. And for being, as I said, so candid with us. It's wonderful. And thank you all for being here, for making this event happen, and for your really thoughtful questions. It's been a pleasure to connect with you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you everyone for attending, and hope we'll see you in future AMAs with people as inspiring as Camilla. Thank you very much, Camilla, for accepting my invitation, and thank you. Thank you, Rachel, also for helping me and leading this time. Thank you.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.
A lovely evening, afternoon, morning, whatever.
Yes. Rest of your day.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.